To say a very good morning to Peter Hitchens, and apologies, Peter, for coming to you a day late. But matters meant that we couldn't quite see you yesterday in your full glory, so we thought we'd do it today instead.
No, I quite understand. I felt a bit lost yesterday, but I coped in the end.
Well, good. I mean, a lot of people did wonder where you were and said, well, why didn't you just bring him down to the pub? But, anyway, so be it. Next time,
well, that would have been an idea, but I did, in fact, have a hangover yesterday.
Yes. Well, that's good.
Yes, it was owing to doing a thing I very rarely do, which is drinking white wine the night before. I really shouldn't ever do that.
No, it's a dangerous
stuff, and I should just endure it completely. It wasn't a matter of quantity, but of quality.
No, quite. And were you able to get out and about yesterday and do anything that you hadn't done for a while?
No, not really. I had work to do, and I don't find it particularly appealing sitting in the freezing wind outside, having my details checked before I'm allowed to have a drink. And the idea of having to be dependent on an app to buy a pint of beer is worrying to me, since an app to me is about as inaccessible as a launch code for a nuclear missile. I wouldn't know how to do it. So it didn't. I'm afraid no. The whole thing was the wrong way around. Here we are thanking Big Brother for being nice enough to let us sit outside pubs we used to be allowed to go into without anybody's permission, and people are supposed to rejoice over it. No thanks.
Yeah. No, I take that point. I mean, I simply took it as a step in the right direction, which I hope it is, and which I hope a lot of pubs and restaurants will take sort of with a pinch of salt, because I think in the end it's up to them. If they take the view that they don't necessarily require what it is that the government says they will require, then they will probably do that.
Don't they face quite severe penalties though if they don't?
They do, but it depends on how easy that will be to figure out and to police and to patrol.
Well, it's extraordinary what they do police, isn't it? They're very good at policing going to church, for instance.
Yes, they're very good at that.
I can easily see them becoming very good at policing pubs and restaurants which don't do the identity checks that are required, and there's the problem. So is it a step in the right direction, or is it a step in the wrong direction, made more acceptable by the fact that you get a drink while taking it?
Yes, well, I guess time will tell, but we shall keep our eyes on them at the very least. Let's talk a little bit about your I thought, very interesting take on Prince Philip, because funnily enough, I on Friday had a thought about my own father, who died a little bit later than yours. He was sort of early part of this century. But he was of a similar vintage as well. And they were very similar types of men. My father was he'd served in the RAF, and he was very kind of, very humorous, very critical of authority, very sort of, always very, very quick with a quip and a sort of, very, very quick-witted and able to put people at ease by just being funny. Have we lost Peter?
So I lost you there.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Am I back now?
Yeah, you're back. Yes. Sorry. Did you hear any of that?
I heard almost all of it except the last few seconds.
Okay. Yeah. So I was pleased that you had the same kind of reaction where he sort of reminded you of your own father.
Well, yes, it is a generational thing. It's also it's very much a naval thing. If you grew up in close contact with any of the armed services, it alters your view of life. And I was very fortunate that my father was in the Navy. Indeed, my mother had been in the Navy during the Second World War as well. So there was a very strong connection. I can still remember the difference in language and attitude and everything. The other coincidence in my case, which is of course meaningless, but it was always fascinating to me, was that my parents had started their family in Malta at roughly the same time that the then Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Elizabeth, was starting a family in the only really private circumstances they ever had in their lives, also in Malta, in the late 40s and early 1950s. Probably actually would have encountered each other at various naval events and social gatherings and whatever else you might have, because the Navy was always quite a small family.
Yes.
And it's always seemed to me to give me a sort of ludicrous but definite identification with the royal family, which is part of the power of royalty in the form of a family, that everybody in the country feels some sort of connection with it. And when asked, actually some time ago, to write about this, it's what I came up with. I was a bit embarrassed about it because I thought people might think I was making some stupid claim. But in fact, I've had some rather touching communications from people saying that they enjoyed it. So I'm glad I wrote it now.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And also, you point out, as I think many people would have seen, that he's a very, despite not being born in Britain, despite not actually being British at the beginning of his career with the royal family, if you want to call it that, he absolutely embodies what being British used to be.
Well, completely. The 2 points there. One is that I think anybody can become British. Here is somebody who was Danish by ancestry, who'd been originally brought up in the Greek royal family, for heaven's sake. And yet by the end of his life, and it was, as I discovered to my surprise, fluent in English, German, and French, and good at a couple of other languages as well. To hear him talk, you would have thought that he'd been brought up in, I suppose, the British upper middle classes.
Yeah.
And I think it was probably the Navy that gave him that. And Britishness as we knew it, and as I understood it when I was growing up, was partly a product of the war, when all the peoples of the United Kingdom, and indeed everybody in what was then the Empire, worked together in a way they haven't done before or since against a terrible enemy. And it forged a particular kind of nationality, which was, because it was forged in wartime, was terse, uninterested in self-pity, required an acceptance of duty. And I think these things are admirable. And there was a long period in our national life when it was not possible to say that they were admirable, and they were largely derided by comedians and the culture and everybody else. But I think there's an understanding now, as the people who embodied those virtues disappear from among us, that actually they had a point. And that there's a society which has nobody in it who believes in duty, and nobody in it who's prepared to be self-effacing in matters of claiming credit. Nobody in it who has that wonderful, dry, dismissive sense of humor which reduces things to proportion. That such people are incredibly valuable in a culture, and we are going to miss having a lot of them about.
No, indeed.
And he was the biggest representative of them among us.
Yes, I think so. And some of the stories about some of his quips, there was a couple of pieces of video which were very funny as well. I mean, we're now reduced, even in the royal family, to a statement or a story today being published about why Meghan Markle didn't come alongside her husband, Harry, because she didn't want to be the centre of attention, which is perhaps the funniest story I've read all week.
Yeah, I know. There was an expression that my mother and my father both used to use quite a lot when people made claims about how concerned they were about others. Oh, that's damn nice of you.
Exactly. I mean, what a completely selfless gesture. To think that she would have been the centre of attention was funny enough, but then to say
it's lovely. It's like I do from time to time use it myself to this day. It's a lovely dismissive, reducing things to the size that they really are expression. Yeah. That's damn nice of you.
Yes, exactly. But have we not? But have we become, do you think, Peter, a sort of divided society? Because I was sort of horrified at the same time as slightly surprised and amazed that so many people complained to the BBC about all the coverage of the fact that Prince Philip had died. I mean, I don't think the BBC got it right. I don't think they should have probably put one channel to sleep for the night and allowed the other two channels to pump out exactly the same programming. But nevertheless, if you don't want to watch it, that's fine. Why would you want to complain about it?
No, I can see what that's about. I mean, the BBC were terribly embarrassed because they made fools of themselves over the Queen Mother. They hadn't realised how important she was in national life, and they underdid the commemoration. So they overreacted by, I think, quite possibly overdoing this. If you look at what happened, for instance, when Winston Churchill died, there was a number of measures. Say, footballers wore black armbands, but the theatres stayed open, and there was a level of national mourning, but the television and radio schedules were slightly interrupted, not wholly taken over. And I think there are an awful lot of people who really have been brought up to not to believe in or feel any particularly strong affinities to the monarchy. I think my own view is it's a great shame.
Yes,
the monarchy has lost its hold over the public mind. People are more interested in show business and sporting figures who would once have strongly identified with the royal family. It's a loss, but it's true. So I wasn't particularly surprised that those complaints came in. I certainly wouldn't have joined in them myself, but I think it is partly a result of the BBC feeling that they made a mistake over the Queen Mother and trying to overcompensate for it. So, what a thing to complain about, honestly. And when there are so many other things in the BBC that ought to be complained about with the actual actions of inaccuracy or straightforward untruth, but hardly anybody complains about, and yet they get worked up because of an episode of their favourite soap opera is postponed for a day.
And do you think that the sort of the people who are less inclined to be in favour of the royal family have been encouraged to be so by some of our politicians, not least St. Tony Blair of this parish?
Well, I think it was obvious that Blair was in competition with the royal family when he was in office, and there was the famous incident of trying to muscle in on royal activities. And politicians, not just Labour politicians, love to pose with the armed forces as if they were commanders in chief, as they are in the United States and they're not here, which is also an interference. But in general, I think a large part of the Labour Party is actually Republican, but just knows perfectly well that this is not a good time to talk about it, and is keeping its powder dry for another time when they're going to come out openly. But it's hard to really claim to be a monarchist when you're not. It's never very convincing, is it? But I think the whole culture, our education system, the very powerful effect of the sort of comedians who get broadcast, the way in which so many people talk about and have talked dismissively about monarchy for so long, has reduced its influence and standing among us. And people who do that, as I've often said, should wonder to themselves sometimes what they think they're going to get instead. My absolute nightmare is President Piers Morgan, but I think that there are several stages between here and there which are nearly as bad.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, also, if you cast your eyes across the pond to Europe, there are still one or two kind of royal families that remain, but they don't really seem to have any purpose, and they've become more or less pretty irrelevant. Whereas at least here, we still see the monarchy, or at least many of us do, as a kind of semblance of stability.
Well, yes, I mean, there are the continental royal families are much diminished in most cases by the fact that their countries were occupied by the Germans during the Second World War, and everything in those countries is permanently diminished by that. Interesting fact, by the way, we are the only monarchy left in Europe, and I think in the world, which still has the coronation service as monarch. The others are basically just inaugurated like presidents. There isn't any ceremony at all.
Right.
We do have a unique possession, which I think is very valuable, and which does contribute not just to stability, but to keeping politicians out of areas which they would like to muscle in on. All the glorious and enjoyable and ceremonial stuff, and poncing about in uniforms and taking the salute. They can't do that here because the monarchy gets in the way, and its principal function, in my view, is to get in the way and stop politicians doing that kind of thing. I don't want to see the Prime Minister taking the salute from the armed forces or wearing a military uniform. Thank you very much. But these things are, some sort of ceremony and grandeur is necessary to any state. So who's going to actually benefit from it? Not politicians, has to be right.
No, it does, and it does fulfil quite a good role in that sense. The other piece I thought was interesting was the one you wrote about Ireland, because we've heard an awful lot of rubbish talked, I think, in the last week about the so-called riots in Northern Ireland, as to whether they're the cause of anything that's going to happen in the future. Whether, there's been an awful lot of people commenting on Northern Ireland who don't really know much about Northern Ireland.
Well, hardly anybody knows much about it. I don't claim to know much about it. I haven't been there enough or read enough about it. But I've been struck from the very beginning of the so-called current peace process and the 1998 agreement by how little it's been understood. And for instance, I once had a conversation with the Labour Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, whose blushes I will spare by not naming him, and asked him a detailed question about the agreement. He didn't even know that it contained a provision for a referendum to unite Northern Ireland with the Republic, which is in fact its key provision. It's it's a delayed landmine.
Yes.
It has that in it, and eventually it will come about.
Yeah, because is it not rather curiously set up to be done when they believe they can win it?
Yes, and indeed, what's more is it can be held every 7 years until it comes up with the right result.
Right.
If it comes up with the wrong result, that is to say, the Northern Ireland remaining in the United Kingdom, it can be held again. If it comes up with the result that Northern Ireland should be transferred to the sovereignty of Dublin, it's over.
Yeah.
Which tells you obviously what its actual purpose is.
Right.
But I think some of the stupider people on what is misleadingly called the loyalist side, particularly the gangsters who were released from prison at the same time as their IRA opposite number gangsters, bought the agreement because it gave them privileges, it got their people out of jail, and it allowed them to do what they've continued to do since 1998, which is to operate their protection rackets and smuggling rackets and all the other horrible things that they do. They thought they'd got away with it, but the thing is that the unionist people of Northern Ireland are beginning to grasp that they are actually on the road to being ruled by Dublin, not just ruled by Dublin. There's a curious thing about the agreement which most people aren't aware of, which is that it allows political parties in Northern Ireland to raise money abroad, which no other party in the United Kingdom, or I think in the Irish Republic, is allowed to do. So Sinn Féin has an enormous ability to raise money in the United States, which it is very good at. And one of the reasons, there are others, of course, for the growth in Sinn Féin's power and influence north and south of the border is this amazing ability to raise funds. And there is a great danger that Sinn Féin will become a major governing party in Ireland. And you could see not just a reunification of Ireland, but a reunification of Ireland under a Sinn Féin government. And that must be alarming, I thought, to practically anybody in Ireland of any sense, but particularly to unionists in Northern Ireland who might be ready to be ruled from Dublin by a civilized government of Democrats, but would be very hesitant to be ruled from Dublin by a government which contains Sinn Féin.
Yes, and I think
that is a future which now looms, and it must be worrying for people in Northern Ireland, and indeed worrying for people in the Republic as well, who I think didn't quite realise the monster they were creating when they welcomed Sinn Féin into normal politics again under American pressure.
And the proof about that agreement, really, or the truth about it, I should say, is that it was basically giving away the farm, was it not, to the Sinn Féin supporting side of Northern Ireland, and basically it now would appear that the PSNI is so guilty of what happened when it was the RUC that they appear to be in some way more favourable, shall we say, to former IRA members.
Well, it's not just that. And the really key thing about it was this. There have been traditions in Northern Ireland on both sides, unionists and nationalists, which were peaceful and democratic and lawful. And they were pushed to one side by that agreement, which rewarded on both sides those which had not been peaceful or democratic or lawful. In fact, the mass release from prison of people who one could, I think the word gangster is appropriate. Yeah. But who operated as gangsters under political cover, and the way in which the parties which had, again, let me put this gently, had not renounced violence began to grow in strength and power, and the parties which had renounced or denounced or refused to take part in violence, which were constitutional, were pushed to one side. So the two great peaceful parties, the Ulster Unionists and the SDLP, were both pushed to one side by parties whose, how shall I put it, were less concerned with legality than they were. And that was the great damage done by the agreement. It rewarded the politics of intimidation.
Yes. And unfortunately, that is really what led to what was going on in the Protestant areas of West Belfast over the past week. It seems to have quietened down a bit this week. Because, yes, you could say that Brexit is partially a catalyst, but it's not really the main one, is it?
I think it's very important that it has created. As you probably know, my position on the European issue was that we should have stayed in the single market and gone for what's called the Norway option. Yeah. And had we done so, this wouldn't have arisen. But once we left the single market, there was going to have to be some sort of frontier in Ireland between the North, which was not in it, and the Republic, which was. And that was resolved by, I have to say, a pretty crummy non-fudge by the Johnson government, which basically said, having said there would be no border in the Irish Sea, they then created a border in the Irish Sea. And there isn't any question at all that this is a very important step away from unionism and towards the incorporation de facto of Northern Ireland in an EU-dominated Republic of Ireland. I think even completely peaceful, serious, constitutional, democratic unionists have got reason to see this as a danger sign. And when that spreads, when that sort of fear spreads into the areas where it's been happening, then you see a difficulty. How is this going to be resolved? I don't know. I've said for years and years that this may all end up with a Sinn Féin president or Taoiseach in Dublin sending Irish troops to Belfast to put down loyalist riots in the Shankill Road. And basically the mirror image of what happened in 1969. You'll get a united Ireland, but it won't be united in spirit. And this has always been the danger. The problem with Northern Ireland is you've got two communities, and neither of them should have the whip hand over the other.
No, but this is the thing.
The direct rule, continued direct rule would, which is again my solution now impossible, but perfectly possible if we hadn't given in to the Gerry Adams strain of thought. Right. A direct rule from London with neither side, with the abolition of the Stormont government, and neither side being able to lord it over the other, would have been far, far better than a position where one community can say, well, we don't really recognize this government. It's not our police force. It's not our government. It's not our state. And permanent alienation. I just think it was a terrible mistake, and I still wish we hadn't made it. All I can do now is say I wish we hadn't made it and comment upon it, but I don't see what can be done about it. Particularly the creation of this customs border in the middle of the Irish Sea has created a new tension. I don't see any easy way of resolving that.
Yes, no, it's a fascinating quandary. We should be keeping our eyes on it. Peter, thank you very much indeed. We spoke, of course, to Kate Hoey a little while back, the Baroness over in Northern Ireland. She said that what she thought was possibly a solution was for the European Union to recognise Northern Ireland on its own as within a customs area, but not the rest of the UK. And that surely might be the answer, but we shall see. We'll be talking about it, I'm sure, many, many more hours.